Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel and we do all kinds of different stuff, but for the last few months we've been working on Bible decodes, New Testament decodes, and this is number 126, and we are looking at some of the work of Michael Menescotz, M-E-N-A-S-G-O-T-Z, and his new book called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. He is one of many historians that have leaned into the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the New Testament was written in whole or in part by the Roman Caesars, in particular the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, and that is Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, that ruled the Roman Empire from 69 to 96 AD. And they, according to the theory, wrote the Gospels and backdated them by 40 years. They wrote them in the early 70s, early to mid 70s AD, and backdated the story by 40 years. And at the same time, they wrote a history of the Jewish war between the Romans and the Jews that occurred from 66 to 73 AD. And they wrote this, it's called the Jewish War, or War of the Jews. And they wrote those two things at the same time, and they wrote under the Jewish War under the pseudonym of Josephus. So you probably heard of Josephus, as he is really the only other author other than the New Testament to actually corroborate the existence of Jesus in the first century, and he did so in this work and in his later work called Antiquities of the Jews. So this is War of the Jews, 7 volumes. And Josephus is known as being one of the great historians of all time, especially of antiquity, and one of the greatest selling books ever, most read books ever. It used to be part of the Bible, the canonical Bible, for a lot of different sects, and still is for the preterist sect. But if you dig into the War of the Jews, especially with keeping the New Testament in mind, or digging into that at the same time, a lot of red flags will appear. The first major red flag is that if you read the new War of the Jews, it talks about General Vespasian. Okay, so what happened is that the Jews had been waiting for a Messiah, but the Messiah that they were waiting for, from Old Testament prophecies and so on, the Messiah that they were waiting for was a military general who was going to help them throw out the colonial power, whether it was the Persians, the Babylonians, or the Romans, or the Syrians, or the Greeks. And in this case, it's the Romans in the first century. And there were 3 pretty good candidates for that Jewish Messiah that rose up in the 60s AD and really kind of kicked out the Herods, the dynasty of puppet governors of Judea under the Romans. Herod, there's not just one Herod, there were about 20 of them. And the Jews kicked those guys out, and that caused Emperor Nero to send in General Vespasian to quell the uprising and lay siege to Jerusalem. And he did so, but eventually the Romans assassinated Nero, And that led to the year of the four emperors, where three more successive emperors were appointed and assassinated promptly, leading to General Vespasian getting the call to be the new emperor in about 69 AD. So when Vespasian went to Rome, he appointed his son Titus as the new general. And so this history, this war of the Jews, goes over all this stuff in detail, but in particular, it goes over the Titus's military campaign. Okay, so once Titus began to start fighting against the Jews as the leader, the general, it goes over his military campaign. And if you read the Gospels, you will notice, or you may not notice, but now that you're looking for it, you should be able to notice that Jesus's 3-year ministry in Judea is an exact copy of Titus's 3-year military campaign in Judea. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus goes. And when whatever adventures Titus gets, or whatever, circumstances that Titus finds himself in, are the same that Jesus finds himself in, except they're not the same, like, exactly. They're the same conceptually. They have, you can state what they were doing. It's the same thing, even though it doesn't appear like, it's not an identical mirror image of it. It's a type. It's a typological comparison. They're going through conceptually the same events. So, for example, Jesus, even before his ministry, he meets, I believe, Simon and Andrew on the fishing boat and talks them into becoming his disciples and following him. And he says, "Follow me, and you will become fishers of men." And he does this at the Sea of Galilee, and at a certain date. And then if you flash forward exactly 40 years to the day, you will see Titus on the Sea of Galilee, and he's fighting a war against the Jews on the water. And some of the Jews, I believe the boat sank or capsized or something, and many of the Jews fell into the water. And Titus commanded his men to, when their head comes up above the water, spear them or harpoon them. And if you can't do that, reel them in with a net. So Titus is basically saying, follow me and you will become fishers of men. If you follow my orders, you will be fishers of men. So that is, one example of very, very many of the military campaign, the 3-year military campaign of Jesus, a 3-year military campaign of Titus, being copied by a 3-year ministry of Jesus. And you could say that it may be it's the other way around, because the events that Jesus participated in occurred first. Well, not exactly, because they backdated it by 40 years, but they were both written approximately the same time. There's certainly a lot of evidence in the Gospels that they were written after the Jewish War. They rely upon the Jewish War for some of the information that's conveyed in the Gospels. But regardless, the story of Jesus is just that. It's a story of Jesus, but the story of Titus is a history. It is corroborated by other writers. It wasn't, Titus was a real person who actually existed. He was the emperor of Rome, general and then emperor of Rome. And so you could say that Josephus just made it up, and he made it to copy the story of Jesus, but that story wasn't really at hand for him to have done so. But the more red flags are just that the fact that the Romans wrote this fits in with everything. They had a clear motive. The Jews had been a major thorn in the side of the Romans for over a century because of their monotheistic God who called them the chosen people. They were very xenophobic and separatist. They had all of these idiosyncratic rituals that they performed, and including circumcision, animal sacrifice, strictures against graven images, and these things all prevented them from assimilating to the Romans. And so there was one revolt after a revolution, after an insurrection, after an uprising for the Jews, and they were a pain in the butt for the Romans. The Romans were trying to govern an entire empire, and they were spending an inordinate amount of time dealing with the Jews. And so they went right into their bag of psychological operations, which is exactly what the Romans would have done and did do in many other cases, including against the Jews for a different group of the Jews, the Pharisaic Jews. They set up the Jamnia campus for the start of rabbinical Judaism. And they did it almost exactly the same way as they wrote the Gospels. And so anyway, they had a motive to do this. And basically what they did is they knew the Jews were waiting for a military Messiah. And so instead they substituted a Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and turning the other cheek on oppression, and walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack, and believing that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Israel, and telling his Jewish comrades to forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do, and then at the same time going outside the temple and overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers, who were changing the Roman money with graven images on it for the coins of the Jews that did not have graven images on it, so that they could bring them into the temple for offerings, and to disrupt the commerce of the Jews who were selling pigeons and doves outside the temple so that they could use them in animal sacrifice rituals. So Jesus is taking direct aim at the Jewish rituals, and at the same time directly supporting the Romans. So, that doesn't seem quite likely unless it was a Roman psychological operation. Moreover, the Romans had a monopoly on publishing. They had a monopoly on censorship. They had a monopoly on distribution. They had the only postal service in the Roman Empire. If something was going to be published, it had to have been agreed to by Caesar before that even happened. And consider also that the New Testament was written in Greek originally, which is one of the two languages used commonly in Rome, along with Latin, and not so commonly in Judea, although it was present, but it was pretty much only the Jewish elite used Greek. Jesus would have been, had he existed, he probably would have been speaking in Aramaic, and only 5% of people in Judea knew how to read and write. So this would have been much more, whereas in Rome the number was 2 or 3 times that amount. But really the New Testament was written to be performed as a play or as a series of plays in front of the masses, because for that exact reason. And so Michael Menescotts, the author here, argues that well, what he does is he looks at the Book of Luke in particular, and he looks at War of the Jews, and he tries to find as many parallels as he can. And he dug out 250 parallels from the Book of Luke, matching up with Jewish war. Now, in some cases, Jewish war is parodying the Book of Luke. In some cases, the Book of Luke is parodying Jewish war, which basically means because they're mutually parodying each other, they were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason. And we know that Josephus was writing from Rome, from Caesar's palace, where he lived for over 20 years. Or maybe he's a pen name or a pseudonym of some other people who are living at Rome, which I think is much more likely. Okay, now, so what Menescotts did is he found these 250 parallels, and then he graphed them out. He put the Book of Luke on the vertical axis, and he put the War of the Jews on the horizontal axis. After putting 250 dots on the paper, he recognized, probably before he got finished, but he recognized that they form 5 near-perfect Latin letters. Latin being the other language of the Romans, and in particular the Roman elite at this time. APTVS. We can pretty much garner that the TVS stands for Titus Vespasianus, because they use that on coinage that they minted during their reigns, the T or the TVS. And then the AP, there is some dispute about. Some authors think it was this guy named Arius Piso, who was kind of a shadow character in the Roman royalty. And some people think it was Aegion Numa or Aries Piso or numerous other things. I think Menescotts has some ideas on that, but that he's going to try to elucidate here in some of these subsequent passages. So we'll take a look here. He's getting to example 5, which this has all been leading up to. He's been kind of touting this example that he's about to get into. So we'll see where he goes. Since 1979, Roman Piso and Abelard Reuchlin, 2 authors, have argued that Jesus' statement in Luke 4, "Get thee behind," is a hint where the word behind is a riddle pointing to the phrase the piso, because behind in Greek is opiso, O-P-I-S-O. So it uses the same word splitting technique, because O means the in Greek. So it could be opiso or it could be the piso. Over 4 decades later, my effort to catalog the parallels between Luke and War of the Jews revealed that this verse in Luke is parodied by paragraph 616 of Jewish War, and that applying the same word-splitting technique to the obvious word in Jewish War, which is Artorius, A-R-T-O-R-I-U-S, gives us the Arius. Oh, it's pretty interesting. I haven't seen that before. Now, you have to keep in mind that this was a big, this was entertainment and fun for the Romans. I mean, there was certainly a motive that they had, to neutralize or domesticate or prune the Jews. But they played riddles and word games and typologies and puns and pseudonyms. These are, word splitting, using words from different languages. This was a big, this was entertainment for them. And for the Jews too, for that matter. Especially the Talmudic Jews, the ones, the Pharisaic ones that were at this campus at Jamnia. So it's interesting that the two parallel paragraphs that he finds, one says the Piso and the other one says the Arius. Independent verification is the hallmark of good science. This suggests Roman Piso was right, that the Gospels hint at Arius Piso, or else an extremely phonetically similar name such as Aries Piso. This remarkable parody is detailed in the following table. Okay, so what he doesn't mention here is that Abelard Reuchlin and Roman Piso were working independently, and they both are fluent in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and they were reading letters between Roman royalty, between Pliny the Younger, Tacitus, Suetonius, Plutarch, and Josephus, and people like that. And they were using all this, they wrote with a lot of different aliases as well, like Josephus, but also Optimus Maximus, and Plutarch was probably a pseudonym as well. But they pretty much tracked it down through exhaustively reading all these letters. This was really a practice that was started by Sir Ronald Syme at Oxford in the early to mid 20th century. And they used the same method, and they independently arrived at Arius Piso as the author of the New Testament, him and the rest of his family. It was kind of a family business. His father was executed by Nero for plotting, because they tried to present it to Nero, and Nero wouldn't go for it. So they couldn't do the gospel thing until Vespasian and Titus were on the throne. And a bunch of Arius Piso's children wrote later books, as well as Pliny the Younger, who wrote the Pauline epistles later, according to them. And they both independently arrived at this. And so the fact that Menescots independently arrived at this, the Arius and the Piso as well, I think adds more evidence. Okay, so he's looking here at paragraph 616 of the Jewish War, and he actually says in parentheses here that 616 is the number of the beast in some manuscripts of Revelation. I have not seen that either. You can tell me if that's true, but and I don't. That doesn't hold a lot of weight for me though, because I haven't even seen a copy of Josephus where he numbers the paragraphs. I think that he should have used a different numbering system than paragraphs when he graphed out this Jewish. It doesn't matter much, it's not really going to affect the shape of the diagram. But I haven't seen a copy of Josephus that is in paragraphs. I mean, that counts like 1 to 693, or maybe 694. Okay. Here's 616. The Romans had set fire to the cloisters on the 24th, but now on the 27th of the month, the third day, evoking the day Jesus gained the power over death and emerged from the tomb. Okay, that's in parentheses. I shouldn't even have read that. But now on the 27th of the month, the Jews now set fire to the temple themselves. So the Romans set fire on the 24th, the Jews set fire on And that's a constant theme in Josephus, is that the Jews are their own worst enemy, and these Jewish zealots were always destroying their own property and so on, and killing each other. Some Romans had gotten up on the Holy Temple of Jerusalem and were now trapped in the flames, fearful of leaping to their deaths. One of the Romans, Artorius, escaped in a subtle way by summoning Lucius. And he says this evokes summoning Lucifer, the devil who was an angel. But I also believe that Arius, Piso's father, was named Lucius, and he was assassinated or executed by Nero. Now, I could be wrong, because it could be his uncle. Definitely either his father or his mother, his father or his uncle was named Lucius. And the other one was named Gaius. So one of the two was, I believe Lucius was the one that was executed. Anyway, Artorius, which means the T-O of Artorius means the in Greek. So Artorius, if you take out the, it stretches out to be the Arius. But not really, because it's in the middle of the word. But anyway, I think the Romans would have played this game. But Artorius said that he would leave him heir to all he had if he would catch him as he fell. So Lucius came running. Artorius cast himself down. Sounds like a bad idea. Artorius cast himself down from the temple onto Lucius and saved his life, while Lucius was dashed against the stone and died. Artorius retreated, and the temple burned as far as John's Tower. Okay, now the parallel passage is from Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 10. The devil took Jesus to a high mountain. Now, the Jerusalem temple is a notable high mountain as well. So the devil took Jesus to a high mountain, saying, "All this power and glory I give you." Jesus answered Satan, saying, "Get thee behind me." And the word behind is given in the original Greek as opiso, O-P-I-S-O. And O means the in Greek. So he says, Jesus answered Satan by saying, "Get thee behind me, opiso," or "Get thee behind me, the piso." Then the devil brought Jesus to Jerusalem, setting him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said, "If you are the Son of God, cast yourself down from the temple. For his angels shall hear you up to their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone." And the devil departed. So there are actually several parallels there other than the piso stuff. Casting yourself down from the temple and getting caught with your hands and dashing yourself against the stone. And the mountaintop. So that's pretty interesting. I hadn't seen that before. Okay, as above, paragraph 616 of Jewish War expertly parodies Luke 4, 5 through 10 in numerous ways, allowing the reader to use the same word splitting technique on the right, where opiso splits to form the piso, and on the left, where Artorius splits to give the Arius. Although not exactly, because the T-O is in the middle of the word as opposed to at the beginning of the word. So, but a lot of times that is what the Romans do with their code, is they leave it exactly one spot away from being obvious. They don't want it to be obvious, but they do want you to get it. They call that grace. Notice that where Jesus talks to the devil on the roof of Jerusalem's holy temple, Artorius is in the flames on the roof of Jerusalem's holy temple. He calls Lucius, where Jesus discusses the devil giving his power to Jesus. Artorius offers to give Lucius all he was heir to, although he then kills him instead. Where Jesus' story talks of being cast down from the temple, Artorius literally casts himself down from that temple, where Jesus' story talks of angels bearing him up in their hands, lest he dash his foot on a stone. Artorius literally gets supported by Lucius. Okay, let's try to turn the page here, which can be somewhat of an adventure. Representing the Lucius representing the fallen angel Lucifer. I would question that. I think that Lucius is representing either his uncle or his father. But anyway, thereby being very literally borne up thereby by preventing him dashing his feet on what is described simply as a stone. Where in Jesus' story, the devil departs in Jewish war, Lucius, where in Jesus' story, the devil departs. In Jewish war, Lucius is literally killed. This extraordinary parallel is important for two reasons. Firstly, it shows Roman Piso and Abelard Reuchlin and Henry Davis were all correct to point to Jesus' statement to the devil in Luke 4:5 through 10, "Get thee behind me," as being a pointer to the names Arius Piso, even though it only points to one of those names, namely the Piso. They had no knowledge about the connection with Jewish War 616. He doesn't know that, I don't think. But anyway, they had no knowledge about the connection with Jewish War 616, but discovering this shows that there is a combined riddle that does indeed point to two names, the Piso and the Arius. Secondly, it gives us an insight into what the Flavian emperor's final religion was supposed to involve. Jesus gaining power over